$236 billion. This is how much human trafficking generates globally each year. 2/3 of this comes from sexual exploitation. Now, human trafficking may not be what you always think. It's not always being locked up or moved from one location to another. The definition of human trafficking, when one person exploits another for labor, services, or commercial sex, using force, fraud, or coercion. But another definition of human trafficking is anybody under 18 years old who engages in commercial sex is considered trafficked. And this is because minors, or those under 18, cannot legally consent to commercial sex. But what really is the difference between somebody who's 17 and 18 years old? I argue that those who are going off to college, living away from home for the first time, or entering into their first relationships, sexual relationships, it can be actually the most vulnerable time. It can be when sexual exploitation even starts. So it's not always voluntary when someone is 18 and over and engaging in commercial sex. Can you remember ever being naive? So I was walking across the sculpture garden at my university when I was a 17, 18-year-old freshman in college, and a woman approached me, and she said, a man standing a few feet away from her was her friend, and he's a sculptor, and he would like to know if for $50 I would pose in the nude for him. Now, I said no, but what if I needed the money? Now, a human trafficking survivor said that she was approached by a modeling agency on her college campus when she was living out of state, away from her parents. It turns out that it wasn't a modeling agency. Once they got all of her information and knew where she lived, they then threatened to harm her parents or her roommate. And for years, she was trafficked into commercial sex. She was even going to classes, and nobody even knew that this was happening to her until one day she was a trafficker herself, because this is what traffickers do. They force them to become traffickers, and it's very common for college students to traffic each other and recruit each other. So the FBI caught up to her, and they helped her out. But when I was an undergraduate, I remember responding to an ad in the paper for a summer job. I took the job, and it was actually a one-man office, and I could have easily been preyed upon. Shortly after that, I went to the Philippines for my master's in social welfare program. I was only 21, 22 years old. But this was a truly transformative experience because I was an HIV prevention counselor in the red light district, and this is where I realized that the hundreds and thousands of women and girls, some of them even 12 and 16 years old, were recruited a lot of times from rural provinces to support their families, to work in these nightclubs and massage parlors. And I realized at that point that it's really the economic realities, sometimes of a whole nation, that drives this situation to happen. And then I worked also in Mexico with the same population, and today, 25,000 women and girls are working in the red light district. And this is actually an increase from a few years ago. And so the situation of women and girls, it really hasn't changed, and how can we let this happen? Recently, my MSW graduate student, she was trafficked by her stepfather in Tijuana, Mexico, to work in those very nightclubs and bars that I had been studying. So here in the US, in San Diego, California, just within a few miles radius, I took these photos of these strip clubs, five or six of them. Here in the US, the situation is really not that much different. A lot of college student survivors are telling me that they worked in strip clubs and they were as college students, and they were very much psychologically harmed and sexually exploited. And so this prompted me to think about what is the extent of human trafficking on college campuses? Because we're really not talking about this, and we're really not hearing these stories. As a faculty, there's a staff who said that her friends were pulling their daughters out of high schools in San Diego because they were constantly being trafficked. And then I heard from a colleague that some construction workers on campus overheard how a professor was sexually exploiting a student, and he didn't even know the student was in his class. And then there's a survivor who said that she was hired as a stripper for a fraternity at my university, and this was a time when she was being trafficked. And so because of these stories are lesser known, the Nemeth Foundation in San Diego supported me in surveying up to 1,000 college students across 12 campuses in San Diego and Imperial Valley in Southern California to see the extent that this was happening. And this is what we found. 1 out of 5 said that they were being trafficked. They were being sexually exploited, forced, coerced, or frauded into commercial sex acts as a college student. And the top reasons were financial. But those who were trafficked, who was not just doing commercial sex, but said they were really being forced, frauded, or coerced into it, they were 2 times more likely to do it for school, food, or rent expenses, which is not too surprising because right now there's students living out of their cars, food insecure. BIPOC, foster youth, LGBT, females and males, they were all targeted, but Black students were especially targeted. They were 2 times more likely to be trafficked. If one needs assistance, they get approached by a stranger offering a way out, a student said. This is how they recruit young individuals on campus. They exploit their vulnerabilities. And students are saying that it's happening more than we think. There's even some large networks on some campuses. Another one said that BIPOC students are mostly targeted to avoid raising suspicion, which is really disturbing. But equally disturbing is that those college students who were engaging in commercial sex, whether or not they said they were being forced or coerced or trafficked into it, they were experiencing psychological harm, physical abuse. There's rape, sexual violence, drug, alcohol use initiation, because as we know, when someone is doing commercial sex, it's often a very painful physically and psychological experience. Sexually transmitted infections, and their academic performance was harmed. College students said that they thought their universities posed a medium to large threat of human trafficking on their campuses. And what did they want? They wanted to have more culturally sensitive mental health counseling, more human trafficking and trauma-informed counseling on campus. The sad thing is that at least 50% were not comfortable in seeking out services on campus. They were not comfortable in seeking out mental health services, even if they had the sexually transmitted infections, police, academic services, housing and food insecurity kind of resources. And this was because the top 3 barriers was shame, stigma, and fear. The other thing that they wanted was an educational information and trainings on human trafficking at their colleges and universities. So instead of using the slogan modern slavery that college students may not really relate to in terms of human trafficking, we're coming up with these materials such as this one that shows an apple that may appear attractive may not really be what you think. But we're also co-creating some educational materials and trying to think of other methods that survivors and college students want. The other thing is that, and this is something that you all can do, I'm really excited because I met with the state legislator's office to see if they can amend a bill to require human trafficking content in all universities and colleges. Right now, there's 15 states that follow California in getting human trafficking content in all high schools and middle schools. But on our college campuses, we only have Title IX, which is sexual assault training that all faculty and students need to take, but it doesn't encompass human trafficking. So only the state of Virginia has recently passed a law that does require human trafficking training for freshman orientations. And so this is something that we can all try to do to tackle this issue of sexual exploitation on campuses. And it's really time to do it. We're really overdue. And I hope you will join me in getting this done. Thank you.